Okay, we're about to unravel the long, long fuse of World War I. But here's the thing. We're not starting in the trenches of Europe, no. We're starting with a global power struggle, a massive scramble for empire that really set the stage for a conflict that would change the world forever.
So let's just dive right in. The images we all have of World War I are almost always European. You think of the trenches, the mud, these ancient empires just smashing against each other. But what if that's only half the story? The real question we're digging into here is this. How did a war that kicked off in Europe actually have its fuse lit on continents thousands of miles away?
Well, to answer that, we have to look at the global path to war. Because the road to 1914 didn't just start with an assassination in Sarajevo. Not even close. It really started decades earlier and thousands of miles away. And it was all fueled by this relentless and often pretty ruthless competition for empire. By the time the 20th century rolled around, the great powers of Europe were tangled up in this massive global contest. I mean, they were all chasing the same thing, overseas colonies and all the power and influence that came with them. And this wasn't some kind of friendly rivalry. It seriously cranked up the distrust and the tension between these nations back home.
So if this was a global competition, where was the main arena? Where was the action really happening? Well, for that, we need to turn our attention to the African continent. This place became the primary theater for the scramble for empire, the absolute focal point in the race for resources and power.
This period of really rapid, aggressive colonization got a name that honestly, it just perfectly describes it: the scramble for Africa. And scramble is absolutely the right word. It captures the chaos, the fierce competition, and just the sheer speed of it all as European powers rushed to carve up the continent for themselves.
And you get a really stark visual here of just how this all played out. I mean, the map of Africa was literally being redrawn. You've got Great Britain grabbing strategic spots like Egypt and South Africa, France is staking its claim across huge parts of the West and North, and then you see Germany, kind of the new kid on the block, trying to get in on the action with territories like Namibia and Tanzania. The continent was basically being sliced up like a pie, and everybody wanted a piece.
But what was driving this whole frantic scramble? It really boiled down to three key things. First, you have this hunger for raw materials. The industrial engines back in Europe needed a constant supply of stuff like rubber, copper, and cotton. Second, these colonies gave them new, captive markets to sell all their goods. And finally, it was all about strategic power. Controlling ports and trade routes meant having critical military bases all around the globe.
And this brings us to a really key, destabilizing piece of this whole puzzle: Germany's rising ambitions. As a newly unified and really powerful nation, Germany was a latecomer to this whole imperial game. And believe me, it was not happy about it. It was ready to challenge the old order. And this gets right to the heart of the German perspective. There was this powerful, growing feeling that they had been, as the quote says, unfairly excluded from the colonial world by the old guards, Britain and France. This feeling of being shut out wasn't just them complaining. It became the fuel for a much, much more aggressive foreign policy.
And you can really see the source of that frustration right here. I mean, on one side, you've got these massive globe-spanning empires of Britain and France, and on the other side, Germany's much smaller collection of territories. The Germans wanted what they called their place in the sun, but it felt like all the best spots were already taken.
So this feeling of resentment, it directly translated into action. Germany started pushing this really confrontational and aggressive style of diplomacy. It was all designed to assert its power on the world stage. They weren't just going to ask for a bigger piece of the pie. They were going to try and take it.
And this new German approach wasn't just a bunch of talk. It led to some serious real-world confrontations. And one of the most dangerous was the flashpoint over Morocco. This is where those simmering rivalries almost boiled over into a full-blown war, years before 1914.
Things came to a head twice. First, back in 1905, Germany just openly challenged France's influence in Morocco, and it created a major international incident. Then, just a few years later in 1911, they did it again. This time they sent a warship to a Moroccan port as a show of force. Tensions were at an absolute breaking point.
But here's the crucial thing, the big twist. Germany's aggressive moves completely backfired. The whole point was to try and intimidate France and drive a wedge between it and Britain. Instead, these crises did the exact opposite. They pushed Britain and France into a tighter diplomatic and military partnership, totally united against what they now saw as a common German threat.
So now we have all the pieces on the board. We've got a scramble for empire in Africa, a resentful Germany, these diplomatic showdowns in Morocco, But how does all of this lead directly to the trenches of World War I? Okay, let's connect the dots.
You can just see this clear chain reaction forming. It's like watching dominoes fall. It all starts with that intense imperial rivalry for colonies. That rivalry then creates these diplomatic crises and flashpoints, just like we saw in Morocco. So, in response, nations start forming harder, more rigid military alliances for protection. And the final result? A world that had become a powder keg, just waiting for a spark.
And that is the ultimate takeaway here. This decades-long imperial competition totally transformed European rivalries into a global struggle. It created such a tense and interconnected system of alliances and resentments that a single spark in a corner of Europe was all it took to ignite a war that just engulfed the entire world.
We've seen how global competition for resources and influence helps set the stage for World War I. So, I'll leave you with a question to think about. What international rivalries, for markets, for technology, for resources, are shaping the geopolitics of our world today?